Welcome to this event being hosted by PPP and with the kind support of the Diplomat magazine, which has circulated in the diplomatic community since 1948. And we're joined by the editor, Venetia van Kuffler. Welcome, Venetia. Today, we've got a really interesting discussion to look at. I feel there is so much going on in the space of the energy transition, but very few people have taken the time to gather some expertise and think about the role of nuclear in arriving at net zero. So the purpose of the event today is to shed some light on what is taking place in the UK, what the opportunities might be internationally, and what other elements of nuclear energy might be available. So we've got a lot to cover and some really great expertise to look at. I'd like to let you know that this element of the nuclear project for COP26 for PPP will be recorded. We won't be releasing it until people have given us their approval. This is a 1-hour session, so we'll be finishing promptly at 9. There will also be a webinar, which is going to be, there will also be a round table, which is going to be a closed session for discussion of the main points that come up from here. And that will form the basis of the text and the ideas that we put together in our final paper in about 4 to 5 months' time. If you'd like to participate in that, please do let us know. So today, in order to shed some light on energy, on the transition, and on the role of nuclear, we're joined by Her Excellency Miss Catherine Colonna, who is the ambassador from France to the UK, and we'll be hearing from her shortly. We're also joined by the Chief Executive in the UK for EDF, Simone Rossi. And of course, EDF are the big UK players in nuclear energy and are responsible for delivering on Hinkley Point, something I had a little to do with myself when I was Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change a lifetime ago, now over 6 years ago. And we've also got some great attendees joining us today who I hope will be able to contribute. Tom Greatrix, who some of you will know from the nuclear world. I know from sitting opposite in the House of Commons chamber many years ago when we were debating shale, when he was the lead for the Labour Party and I was for the Conservative Party. Looking back on that, it was a wasted hour or two, but I'm so glad he's now gone off to spend so much time leading in the energy sector. We've also got Claire Perry O'Neill joining us, and hopefully we'll be hearing from her later. I think we've got Warren East from Rolls-Royce and hopefully Dieter Helm. So some really interesting participants. If you'd like to make your contribution, do make it clear in the chat. Try to tell us who you are, what question you'd like to ask, and we will try to bring you in, or I will group the questions and make sure that we ask them. Today's debate, I hope, will be helpful and interesting to all of us who are involved in the energy transition. All of us who care about making sure that we help governments deliver on its net zero commitments, and who hope that COP26 will be a success this year. We need it for the planet, for our future, for our families, and there is such extraordinarily strong momentum towards getting it right that I hope that the contribution that we make here at PPP and the paper that we will be producing on the back of it will help to inform that debate and make a success of it. If you would like to participate, not just in this one, but in future ones, again, let us know. We're going to be focusing on other countries and their role and the ability of different countries to really focus on their own natural resources and challenges and where they are in the energy transition to see what the rest of us can learn from them. So I'm going to ask now Her Excellency Ms. Catherine Colonna, who is our ambassador for the French ambassador to London, to let us know her thoughts on this important subject. Thank you. Over to you, Your Excellency.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the introduction. Let me first to express my thanks to PPP and to Diplomat magazine for their kind invitation, and also for posting a rather nice picture of me. I've seen it on the internet. You cannot really judge, but it really is me behind my mask. I'm at the embassy, and these are the rules here. Safer anyway. I'm happy and honored to be part of this series organized by Public Policy Project in the run-up to COP26. And of course, I'm happy to see you again, Amber and Simone, among others. I hope we'll have a fruitful discussion. I'd like to kick off our conversation by basically saying a few words about French climate and energy policy. And I will focus on the alignment of this policy with COP26, as COP26 has to be a major milestone in the fight against climate change. As you just said, Amber, this COP is important and very important because states will have to set out new commitments for reducing CO2 emissions as planned, stipulated, actually even more than planned, in the Paris Agreement. France has, just like the UK, has set itself a legal target to be carbon neutral by 2050. And in order to achieve this, it will need to have divided by 2 its energy consumption over the next 30 years, and to massively decarbonize the energy that we produce and consume. Because while we are fortunate enough to have electricity that is more than 90% decarbonized, 90%, quite a big figure, and 75 of which comes from nuclear reactors, we have 56 at the time being, we remain, though, highly dependent on fossil fuels. They still count for more than 2/3 of the final energy consumption in France. So it is quite clear that we'll have to go on a massive shift to another system. In order to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, France adopted an Energy Transition for Green Growth Act. That was done in 2015. We're implementing it with different phases. And this important piece of legislation has been supplemented by 2 other important frames. The National Low Carbon Strategy, which sets out an intermediate goal of reducing CO2 emissions by 40% by 2030, compared to 1990 levels. Of course, this is the base for everybody. And then the multi-annual energy plan, many names in it, but very precise things behind those names. It specifies the components of French energy policy until 2018, then it will be reviewed. So it's like control of the energy demand, control of energy costs, promotion of renewables, guaranteed security of supply, energy independence. All that is planified and so far rather on track. The aim of these legislation is twofold. First, to reduce the consumption of energy, especially the high carbon energy, particularly in industry and transport. And second, to harness and develop new technology to produce energy that complements nuclear power with more renewables and in particular more offshore winds. As for France, the share of nuclear is expected to fall to around 50% by 2035. This bedrock of decarbonized, controllable electricity is important for us to enable us to develop intermittent renewables. And French President Emmanuel Macron recently confirmed very, very officially that France's energy and ecological future requires nuclear, that it will remain a pillar of the energy mix in France for the next decades. If I come to our 2 countries' visions and policies, I'd say our 2 governments have very similar views on the future energy mix, comprising nuclear and renewables, and I do welcome that, of course. On the ground, the Hinkley Point project is the most visible part of this joint approach, leading to a stronger cooperation between businesses in our 2 countries. These close ties, quite successful, will continue, I hope, with the Sizewell project, but we will see down the road if we can make it when. As we all know, the key to development of nuclear power is funding and cost. Nuclear must show it can reduce its cost and must be competitive with other decarbonized energy sources. So let me touch a few words about these. In the field of renewables, our goal is to double installed capacity to achieve more than 100 gigawatts by 2028, which will account then by nearly a third of the electricity produced. With regard to offshore winds, which I know is a priority for the British government as well, France would like to acquire installed capacity of 5.2 to 6.2 gigawatts by 2028, thanks to fixed and floating wind farms distributed across our coastal areas. And I would also like to mention hydrogen, as France is a strong believer of the potential of hydrogen for the future. I'm sure you've seen and heard about our plans for trains and planes. It is a medium-term future. It is not science fiction. We have a plan for that. We're devoting 7 billion between now and 2030 for hydrogen. So it should help us decarbonizing industry and all forms of transport, be also a job-creating sector and so on and so forth. I'd like to conclude this quick overview by pointing out to you that this goal will largely rely on the French recovery plan. It's a 100 billion plan, quite massive. And it's interesting to know that out of these 100 million, 30 billion is by law devoted to green investment. It is quite new for us, and it will be a driver for that change that absolutely, as I pointed out, we need to do. So it will help us to improve the efficiency in energy intensity, the efficiency in buildings, develop green infrastructures, develop new forms of mobility, and so on and so forth. So to end up there, when we talk about climate change, we know that the pressure is there, the pressure of facts is there. We know that time is short, but things are making progress, and I'm optimistic that in Glasgow especially, but just to start before that, we will engage countries to announce new engagement, new commitments, which is absolutely necessary, so we can make COP26 a genuine success in November, as we need it. None of our countries, none of our peoples, none of the planet can afford COP26 to be a failure. So we're there, ready and working with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Ambassador. And I hope that COP26 can be as successful in Glasgow as COP21 was in Paris, when the French government kindly hosted it there. And it was so interesting to hear from you just now about not just the new role of nuclear in France, but also France's commitment to other forms of renewable energy. And some of us watched, if I may say, with admiration when the stimulus for local internal air flights was attached to certain targets for the railway travel. Well, I can't quite remember. There was an offset on the railway to make sure that it was cheaper. It was basically a green stimulus, which looked very forward looking to the rest of us. Okay, so I'm going to ask, thank you very much. I'm going to pass on now to Simone Rossi, who I see has got a rather marvelous backdrop behind him, which I imagine is something to do with Hinkley. Is that right, Simone?
That's it. These are the columns of the turbine table.
Great. Please let us know what your plans are for nuclear here and abroad. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Amber. Thank you, Ambassador. So we've got in Britain the Prime Minister's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. It's a fantastic menu with all the ingredients we need. So today I'd like to spend really 5 minutes with you reflecting on one of those ingredients, the nuclear ingredients, and how it differs to the other ingredients And now it can complement the other ingredients in a way. It helps us not put all the eggs in the same basket. So what are the features of the nuclear basket? If I were to ask a question to all of you, or to hundreds of people, say, what are the features of nuclear? And let people think. Well, in Britain, quite a few people would say, well, it's expensive. That is something that many people will say. Whilst I can't deny that building a large power station, such as the one behind me in my backdrop, it is a large sum of money in absolute terms. It is now proven, and it's officially proven in all the numbers published by government in the end of December, that adding a component of nuclear in our energy mix in the future makes it less expensive than what would otherwise be the case. So whilst the absolute amount to invest in a single power station remains large, the impact on the overall system cost in a proper proportion is actually beneficial. What are the other characteristics of nuclear? There are 7 that I'd like to point out that tells it apart from other solutions. All the solutions are required, but why is nuclear so unique? Now, the first is very simple. It's always on, whatever the weather. So it can keep the light on when the sun isn't shining, the wind isn't blowing. The second, it's really simple. It's proven, it works. I'd like to say that fortunately and hopefully many more solutions and technologies will come to fruition over the next decades. They might in due course even replace the role of nuclear, but we are not there yet. So today we do have to make some choices. And in a way, knowing that nuclear is proven and works, does the job, it's not an insignificant feature. And I would say it's a safe bet to a certain extent. The third feature of nuclear is jobs. Well, when you build a power station such as the one behind me, about 2/3 of the cost of construction stays in the country. It's actually local here in Britain. And once you operate it and you include these costs of the lifetime of the station, more than 3/4 of the value stays in the country, becomes jobs. Most jobs are well-paid jobs up and down the country where they're needed the most. They're not jobs in Westminster, just to say it very plainly. This is a percentage higher than any other technology, by the way. The fourth characteristic is actually, if you think about that, nuclear actually is a machine to produce heat, low carbon heat and steam. And historically, we've always chosen to use all the steam to transform into electricity. But there are many more things you can do with low carbon heat. Decarbonizing heat is very, very difficult. You can use heat directly as such, or you can feed it into an electrolyzer to produce hydrogen more efficiently, which is a very nice application. Or you can actually feed it into a direct air capture machine to absorb CO2 from the atmosphere, which could make nuclear, in this sense, carbon negative, as they say. The fifth characteristic, it brings sovereignty and control. Last week, there were auctions to attribute capacity contracts in the UK, and I've seen that over 7 gigawatts of capacity contracts have been awarded to interconnection lines. Connection lines are fundamental, very important for Britain to remain connected to the different markets and to be able to import and export at different times. But think about that 10 years from today or 20 years from today, the landscape in Europe will have changed. Many countries are shutting down aging power stations without replacing them. That includes also some nuclear stations, but mostly maybe coal stations, understandably so, because of the climate challenge. So betting on our future here in Britain to always have electricity available behind these lines at a time when we need it might become a little bit of a risk. So I think it's very important, particularly for a country which is an island, to have control on its sources of energy, and nuclear does that. The sixth characteristic is the use of land. nuclear uses very little amount of land compared to other technology. For example, if you were to produce the same amount of energy using solar or onshore wind, that would require between 100 and 500 times more surface than nuclear. It is true, therefore, that the country, by using a lot of offshore wind in a way, and some nuclear, for example, is making a choice to make the most possible land available for alternative uses, which could include, of course, solar and onshore wind, but it could also include forestry, farming, rewilding, all sorts of other uses of land, including uses which are very useful to go to net zero. And the seventh characteristic, I would say it's actually scalable. I mean, we've always thought about nuclear as a very large power station. Now, the truth is that there are several promising efforts being made to develop also small modular reactors, SMRs. And for example, in EDF, we operate in the UK sites in Lancashire, at Heysham, and also Hartlepool, for example, which would be perfectly suitable to host SMRs. And I think it would be a good complement alongside large power stations, let me say, to contribute to the net zero agenda of government and to contribute a share in nuclear. So in conclusion, I'd like to say that nuclear actually indeed has a very specific profile that turns it apart from alternative sources. All sources will be required to go to net zero, but in a way, I would like to hope that COP26 will be an opportunity for Britain to affirm its leadership in the matter of net zero and to embrace fully all solutions that are required for this magnificent task, including nuclear with its very specific attributes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Simone. Yes, it always seems the right answer, doesn't it? When people say, should we be doing this or that? The scale of the task is such that we need to do it all, really, is often the response. Thank you very much for setting all that out. I'm going to invite Tom now, Tom Greatrix from the UK Nuclear Association. And sorry, Chief Executive Officer, Nuclear Industry Association, to open our discussion. And Tom, perhaps you could make some comments, if you wouldn't mind, on the pricing as you open our discussion, because I can see in the chat there's a few questions about pricing, and the way that Simone has put it is interesting, is that it looks pricey, but when it's in the overall mix, it keeps the overall pricing down. I'd be interested in your view on that. And then after you've made some comments, I'm going to ask Dieter Helm to make some comments as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. Yeah, just I suppose on that point, it depends how you make a comparison. If you make a very simplistic comparison on price per megawatt hour of electricity and a strike price comparison, then if you look at the early offshore wind projects, they look expensive compared to the first nuclear one. If you look at more recent negotiations, they look a lot lower. You're not comparing apples with apples though, because firstly, you're not accounting for systems costs. Secondly, you're looking at the first of a kind, which Hinkley is, compared to a whole series effect that you've had in offshore wind. And if you do the same with nuclear, we'll have a similar effect. And I'll leave it to Dieter, I think, to talk about different financing models that have been under discussion in the UK context to reduce the cost of capital, which is the significant impact in the strike price figure that you see. But I think the point Simone was making is borne out by all the evidence that to get to a decarbonised mix overall, then if you try to do it without nuclear, the cost becomes more expensive rather than less expensive. And it goes back to your point, Amber, about why often it's all of the above becomes the answer to a lot of these challenges. But I'm sure we'll come on to that more. I just want to make a couple of very quick remarks just on nuclear and net zero. I'm just listening to the ambassador and also to Simone on these points. You know, Simone referred to the 10-point plan, and it's very much a recipe and not a menu. You need to have all of those ingredients to be able to get there. It's not something you can pick and choose from. And just to underline that point, the IPCC scenarios, majority of those scenarios have an increase in nuclear to get to net zero. And in the UK context, our own climate change committee's trajectory demonstrates that, as well as a significant amount of variable power from significantly offshore wind, We also need to proportion a firm power of 38% to get to that 2050 net zero. And I was struck by what the ambassador was saying about France. In France, 90% decarbonised electricity supply, but obviously that means a huge amount and scale and scope of what have to do in France to decarbonise energy as opposed to electricity. And that's when you're starting with a decarbonised power supply of 90%. On a good day in the UK, we get sometimes to about 70%, 75% of low carbon mix. On a bad day, it can be as low as 25%. So we're even more reliant on fossil fuels for electricity than is the case in France. And so the scale and scope of what we've got to do to get to net zero by 2050 is absolutely huge. So it isn't about, I think, setting this false narrative between renewables versus nuclear. It's about how you get the optimum mix of all of the low carbon sources that give you that sustainability as well as security of supply and making the best of the economic opportunities that come from it. I just want to make a couple of very quick points. Simone mentioned small modular reactors and sites for SMR. We've also got in the UK at the moment ongoing a process of applications for sites for a fusion reactor happening, as well as the large scale projects at Hinkley and potentially Sizewell and others. And again, it's not about a choice between those, it's about making the best of all of those different technologies to get to that net zero endpoint. And in a lot of this discussion so far, and a lot of the discussion I have a lot of the time, we talk about this just in the context of power to grid. I think it's really important to underline in the context of a net zero commitment, that means net zero emissions across everything. So the opportunities and the abilities and the potential to be able to produce hydrogen, where hydrogen is a significant part of the future mix. How do you get that hydrogen in the most environmentally sustainable way? Is almost certainly through electrolysis, and you do that through the use of low carbon power to produce that hydrogen. How you deal with heating, and we've touched on that slightly in the discussion this morning. Synthetic fuels for tackling carbon emissions in maritime and in aviation. All of those areas are areas where nuclear can play a part in meeting that net zero commitment. And I think the point I'd just like to finish on is the scale and scope of what we need to do to get to net zero by 2050, not just in a UK context, but globally, is absolutely immense. Nuclear is not the answer in and of itself, but it's part of the answer. And I think, you know, sometimes the bit that people feel less comfortable talking about or don't want to mention as much as other things, and I don't want to get into that rabbit warren of that discussion, but I do think it's really important that we recognise the potential that nuclear can play, not just in grid electricity, but in the wider decarbonisation mix that we're going to have to really tackle, and we haven't really got very long left to do it.
Thank you very much, Tom, particularly also for reminding us that nuclear doesn't just mean the big nuclear operations like Hinkley Point and possibly Sizewell that Simone was referring to, but also smaller modular reactors potentially, and nuclear fusion. And to be fair, Simone, you also referred to that in terms of the sites. So one's vision of the big nuclear isn't the whole picture.